You're listening to New York's only home for Reefer Madness. Every week, we'll explore the unique perspective of cannabis in the global hub of commerce and culture. Hear the insights, stories, challenges, and successes of those blazing a path from Brooklyn to Buffalo and everywhere in between. I'm your host, Kalen Castetter, coming to you from the Green Valley of Opportunity, Binghamton, New York. This is the Empire State of Cannabis. Welcome to another week of Empire State of Cannabis. We have a really special guest on today, Mayor Hal McCabe. Some call him the cool mayor, but he's also the executive director of the Legislative Commission of Rural Resources in the New York State Senate. Welcome on the show, Hal.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. Kind of excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Legislative Commission of Rural Resources is and what it does?
Sure. The Legislative Commission on Rural Resources was founded in the mid-'80s as a way to make sure that the concerns of upstate New York, predominantly rural upstate New York, were being addressed in the legislature. So our mission is to do policy analysis and also to come up with policies that would benefit the region. And we can focus on any issue area that we want to, unlike committee, where, if you're agriculture, you can only do agriculture. We can look at agriculture, aging, transportation, energy, environment. It doesn't matter. So, right now we're working on some bills that for some legal reform to make it easier for people in rural areas to get legal representation, so they don't have to drive far. So it's a great commission. It's pretty interesting. It's bipartisan. It's made up of 10 members of the legislature, 5 from the Senate, 5 from the Assembly. The chair is Senator Rachel May, and on the Assembly side, the co-chair is Assemblyman Angelo Santa Barbara.
No, excellent. So you there as executive director, what are some of your responsibilities? So you have an office in Albany, correct?
We do. We have an office right in the legislative office building. We do, the easy one is that we do a quarterly newsletter magazine that goes out to about almost 11,000 addresses across New York State, predominantly municipalities, libraries, and sort of stakeholders. And then on top of that, we do, like I said, a lot of policy analysis. So we get a lot of bills brought to us from different members that say, can you let us know what you think the impact of this would be on, the rural areas of New York. And then we do, sometimes we have a few days and sometimes we have a few hours to turn around an analysis to let the member know if we think that they should sponsor it, not sponsor it, vote for it, not vote for it. So, we're looking at things like pesticides, fertilizers. We're looking at, the adult use cannabis. We're looking at energy things. We're looking at transportation. It sort of varies wildly. So it's really interesting. So my job is basically to sort of field these things as they come in and decide what we're going to focus on as far as, what will we just do an analysis on versus what will we actually sort of pick up as one of our issues that we want to try to champion. And so the ones that we're trying to champion really are like I said, the rural legal issues. And we're doing some on hunger and food security, and then the adult use cannabis is one of the big ones that we've been focusing on.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. What do you see when you think about these rural areas, and obviously that the commission is a counterweight to a lot of the interests that you see on the population-based representation in the Senate and the Assembly, which skews heavily downstate and in urban areas. So what do you see as the opportunities in rural areas for farmers and for rural businesses too, in terms of adult use cannabis?
That's a great question. And the issue really is This is where we're um, trying to do all we can to prevent this from being something where 5 or 6 large companies come in and dominate
Hmm.
and squeeze out the smaller farmers, because I think there is an opportunity for a lot of small farmers and small producers in upstate New York to, either transition their farm from something that's not profitable or on the way out. Like dairy's a real tough thing right now in New York. And dairy farms also tend to have sort of they can have more unusual land because they
Hmm.
don't have to grow quite as much, um, as many crops to sustain the farm as, say, a crop farm, which might need 600 or 800 acres. So dairy farms have, generally less land, less acreage, and so they are also tend to be, good candidates for, the smaller intensity of operation that adult use would be. So we think that there's an opportunity, as long as we are really thoughtful about how we hand out the licenses
Yeah.
and what we hope to get out of it. Um, I think that the MRTA 2 takes a big step towards that. Right now, as it stands, the governor's plan is not favorable in that way. So that's one of the things that we're trying to urge him to change in his plan, um, to limit the number of these large companies that can come in and dominate, because that takes away consumer choice, and it takes away really what I think would be the economic benefit to upstate and rural New York. I mean, having 5 or 6 companies, none of which are headquartered in upstate New York,
Yeah.
dominate the industry isn't really going to benefit our economy all that much.
No, it's not. And the part of the problem is you already have 9 of them operating as medical ROs in the space, right? So the question is, what do you do with them? I thought the MRTAC version did a really interesting thing where they said, okay, you're tied to the retail location you already have. So you can be vertical.
Hmm.
But both the CRT and the MRTA doesn't allow for vertical integration, which I think is a big step to allowing more diversification in terms of the space, in terms of licenses. But the MRTAC goes a little bit farther. These micro business licenses, these small business adult use cooperative licenses, nursery license, and on-site consumption. I think that what you've seen in areas of upstate New York as a lot of success is agro-tourism, right?
Hmm.
So how important do you think that these licenses in the MRTAC are important so that we can foster a diverse amount of businesses? Because as you and I know, farmers are some of the most industrious and best business people out there because they do everything, right?
Right.
So they may be in a better position to operate a better business. So how important do you really think those license structures are, and how much are you going to push for it to make sure the final bill is includes those?
That is a critical thing. I do think that presents an opportunity. It presents some challenges because I'm not sure, and you would know probably better than I, if there are states that have sort of been able to adopt that, and successfully implement it, just in terms of the point of sale issues that need to go on, as
Mm.
far as what. And personally, I don't think it's should be any more stringent than it is if you went to a winery or a cidery or a distillery.
Yeah.
If you're of age, then you should be able to make the purchase, but it will be regulated more heavily. And then the one I think is going to be the heaviest lift, that I I just don't think that we will be able to get through, is the on-site consumption. I think that we'll get the most amount of pushback there, um, just because of, again, the perception that the public will have. Again, does it differ that much than the on-site consumption at a winery? No, not really, but in people's minds it does. But I think that the micro businesses, the co-ops, all that's important. I think that it's an opportunity for rural New York, and not just rural New York, to be honest with you.
Mm.
Also the cities. I mean, the micro business licenses allow for some of the urban farms to do this. So I think it's important. It's one of the, I would say, the two things that we're going to push the hardest for. Um, one of the three, because the taxation issue is another one.
Yeah, well, the taxation issue is huge, and you have a unique perspective because you run a municipality here, right? So when
Right.
you looked at the taxes and how they differed from the CRTA to the MRTA, I mean, we did a tax analysis of it and saw that the revenues are going to be greater if you tax it at a lower rate, and we've seen that in other states. I mean, it's
Hmm.
pretty clear, but
Sure.
also you don't tie up cultivators with this cultivation tax
Right.
that is going to make it really tough, and it's going to incentivize economies of scale with large businesses, as you said. But this
Right.
18% tax on distribution, but that includes a 1% county tax and a 3% local tax, right? So, where do you see some of the effects, or how do you think a small municipality like the Village of Homer, right, is going to have benefits either on the positive side or the negative side, and what kind of costs will a municipality like that incur that they could use that 3% tax to kind of mitigate?
Sure. That's a good question. I mean, you if you visited any of the dispensaries in Massachusetts, you'll see that at least some of them have on-site police presence the entire time that they're open,
Hmm.
just to sort of, I think, keep an eye on things. And you're dealing at this point in an all-cash business with all the really valuable merchandise on site. So it is sort of a probably an attractive target for for criminals. So out of the abundance of caution, we would have an officer on the scene, on the site, the entire time. Again, not you know taking down license plates or anything nefarious like that, but simply just being a presence and helping with any issues that arise. So there's a cost associated with that,
Hmm.
and it's more than basically more than a full-time equivalent of an officer. And then there are going to be traffic issues, parking issues, things like that that go along with it. So it has a pretty serious impact on a municipality like the Village of Homer. And if there is no local sharing of the taxation revenue, then there's really no incentive for us to have one. It's just a cost without any incentive and it just becomes a burden on our residents, financially, as well as, again, you know, a lot more traffic, a lot more people from out of the area, things like that.
Hmm.
If they do the 3% or a local impact fee, however they decide to call it, it changes everything, right? Because it allows us to recoup our costs and also, you know, bring in a little revenue to the village, which is a big selling point to the residents, and increases their tolerance of sort of any inconveniences that they might face as there'll be bumps to iron out, as far as we didn't anticipate this many cars, or we didn't anticipate that the majority of the people would come from this direction, so we need to
Yeah.
make changes here or there. So there'll be things to iron out, and it will go a long way towards sort of alleviating some of our residents' concerns.
Yeah.
But the other issue that kind of goes hand in hand with that is, in the governor's proposal, there's the counties can opt out.
Yep.
Well, I think that's a terrible idea,
Yeah.
because you get a county that's more conservative. Cortland County is a great example. They may opt out for the entire county. Well, I think that's short-sighted, especially if there is revenue sharing or an impact fee, um, and it doesn't allow us to actually have a dispensary. So I think, and
Or growing
they,
operations,
oh,
right?
right, growing
Yeah.
or yeah,
Manufacturing.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is, to me, is crazy.
Yeah.
You're shutting off all this economic growth, um, and it's not like you at that point have banned consumption in the county. People will just drive across the county line to any of our neighboring counties, make their purchase, and drive home.
Yep.
We lose all the economic benefits, and people are still
And
allowed to consume it.
And you see an increased issue with public safety too. Now that you're driving, and
Sure.
and also access, right? You don't want to not allow people to have access that the state, or even maybe even in that county you have a majority of people who do support it, right? So I think the problem with the county opt out is it's going to become a political decision in a lot of
Right.
cases, and that's not what you want. So do you think municipalities then should be able to opt out, or that no one really should be able to opt out, and then maybe municipalities can make their own zoning decisions, which will have a big impact on what operations are there?
So I think, well, that's an interesting way to look at it from the zoning perspective. I think that kind of would is a little bit maybe of a cumbersome way to do it. I think that there should be a municipal level opt out, but I think that it should be based on public referendum.
Yeah.
So, if the residents of the municipality really don't want it, they can sign petitions, and when there's enough petition signatures, it goes on a ballot and everyone votes. I think that's the only way to do it. I think that there should be a mechanism for the opt out, but it shouldn't be something that, as you said, is a simple political decision that has ramifications economically, just because of someone's personal political beliefs.
Yeah, and I think it makes the decision a little more complicated, because if you have the tax rates the way you do in the MRTA, where you have a local tax coming back instead of just a county tax, so you can have municipalities in that
Right.
situation that might opt out, but then still reap the benefits of that revenue, or not, and so even though they have increased costs or not. So I think that's interesting to have a referendum. The only problem with a referendum is it might slow things down. In Massachusetts, they did a public referendum statewide to legalize adult use, right? So then they said
Right.
if your town voted against it, you could then bring it up for a vote with the town council. But if not, you could not bring it up for a vote, right?
Oh,
Which is interesting.
that's an interesting way to go about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that would be acceptable. Again, I don't think it should be an easy knee jerk uh, thing to opt out. Um, but I do understand what you're saying, that there is definitely a hold up to making it a public referendum.
Yeah. Well, and I
I
wonder if the longer you wait to roll out and have small businesses be able to operate, first off, the longer you stretch their cash flow if they're holding onto a building, and then also
Right.
the more time you allow these ROs to become more entrenched in the market, right?
Correct.
It's a
And
double-edged
and
sword.
right. And then a lot of these, they might just go elsewhere. The smaller operations inside. Well, if the village of Homer doesn't want us, then we'll move, a quarter of a mile down the road to the
Mm.
town of Cortlandville
Yeah.
and set up shop.
Yep. Exactly.
So, right.
So, and on that municipal and the burdens and the revenue. So, the MRT, the biggest difference between the MRT and the CRTA, well, maybe not the biggest difference, but the biggest point of contention is the tax revenue allocation, right? The governor
Right.
wants discretionary power to spend the tax revenue, and in the MRTA, everything above there's a research threshold, and then the OCM, right? Everything above that's allocated. Um, do you think that with state, county, and municipal budgets in peril because of COVID, that changes that discussion? And do you think it could serve as an important revenue source for these cities, towns, counties, state, et cetera?
Well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. We are facing, all of us, pretty massive shortfalls due to sales tax revenue. I think, the second quarter, the average for the state, we're down 27%. So
Mm.
that's a big part of a lot of budgets in the state, that with no apparent federal municipal level bailout coming, depending on who you talk to, we have to look for everything we can look for, because the residents, as I was explaining to a friend of mine this morning, if this doesn't go addressed, the village might have to raise taxes, and then the town might have to raise taxes, and the county might have to raise taxes, and the state might have to raise taxes. I mean, that's
Mm.
four separate tax increases on one household just in this village. That would absolutely devastate people.
Yeah.
And the municipalities are up against the wall because there are only so many services they can cut before it starts to get dangerous. Can we
Yep.
stop? Do we only plow snow if there's only more than 6 inches on the ground or something like that? So it is an important source of revenue, and I think that it's going to be an opportunity lost if we let it go another year without addressing it. I, do I think that we're going to get to it this year? Unfortunately, probably not, just because of the budget implications. But I think that we should be doing everything we can to get all the issues sorted out so that when we come back in January, it's ready to go, and we can push it through then. Because I really do think that we can't afford to wait uh, another year after that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what we've seen the past 2 years is the governor has his plan. The governor says, we'll pass it in the budget if you agree to my plan, not much compromise. And the tax revenue allocations, I guess, is the big thing. Now, in November, we're tracking, I think, 4 Senate seats that could flip. And you only need two to go to a veto-proof majority in the Senate, right? Does that change the calculation? And is there, do you think, a political willingness on the legislature to say, let's send it to the governor's desk and see what happens if he's not going to buy in,
So that's a great question, and I think the calculus of what to do depends sort of on the level of frustration with the governor at that point. It
Mm.
is one of those things that definitely irritates him, and so they tend to save it for issues where they see no real choice. We may get to that point on this, but I'm not sure. As far as the picking up the seats to make it a veto-proof majority, technically that will be true, but there is pushback from certain regions of the state that are still not really fully on board with this.
Yep.
That I think is will possibly hold that up a little bit until we can sort of assuage their fears and get them over the hurdles that they see. I think they get a lot of pushback from their residents, their constituents, and that's what they're there to do, is represent them.
Yeah.
So I think part of it really also has to be almost an educational campaign that needs to go on in these areas, so that the citizens can start to learn a little bit more about the realities of the situation and what it means to reject it versus to accept it. I you know I like the idea of just moving forward with it, but I'm not sure that there's an appetite at the leadership level for that sort of thing yet.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've
I
got,
think it,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, you
if
got
we
the Long
went
Island
through,
six, and you got the
yes,
two in Westchester. And then if you have these seats flip, those are Long Island, Westchester areas. And in a sense, it's because at that point, you're either getting it done in the budget and protecting their votes. Now, it is an off year, right? So you don't have an
right,
election looming. Or you say, okay, the 6 plus 2, the 8 members there are going to dictate really how the bill ends up, right? So it's almost a rock and a hard place, because you have on
it
one
is.
side you have the CRTA, and the other side you have, well, let's change the MRTA, and let's change some of the allocations. And I think a lot of people thought we were there in during the 2019 legislative session, and it was almost there, and it fell
Hmm.
apart. And I wonder, though, if the political calculus starts to change, where they say, all right, this is 3 years now. If you don't start getting it done, you know part of it, maybe the activist wing is going to get upset. And then it was interesting. We had Senator Tom O'Mara on a few weeks ago, right? And we were
Hmm.
talking about adult use cannabis. And obviously the Republican line is they're not necessarily supporting it, but he said it's inevitable and he doesn't have an issue. And I brought up, I said, well, what if some Republicans came to the table here, said, okay, this is what we kind of want, maybe from a law enforcement perspective or whatever, and that changes the calculus again. What do you think about that? Being in a rural area, what do you think? Because there's a lot of conservatives that are saying we want adult use cannabis, we want the revenue, and it doesn't make sense to keep it illegal.
Look, I think that would be the smartest thing that the Republicans could do. They're upstate. They're all upstate, and they can actually have a real hand in ensuring that a lot of these protections that ensure that small businesses are created throughout upstate New York rather than just letting the large producers do everything. They need to obviously reinforce with their supporters that it is inevitable, because it is inevitable,
Mm-hmm.
and that what they're doing is getting the best deal for upstate and rural New York by coming to the table. I think that's a great idea. I think that they would be foolish not to. Otherwise, all they're doing is sort of pushing back for another year or something, and then eventually it goes past, and they've had no say or input whatsoever on the finished product.
Yep,
So I
exactly.
think that's a great idea. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think that the MRTA2 is closest to what we really want to wind up with, and there's so much that needs to be done with the CRT. That said, one thing I'll say about the governor, he now also knows that it's inevitable, right?
Yeah.
He joined with the other governors in that regional sort of compact to say, look, we want to have very similar rules and all that, so that we aren't in competition with each other. He does not like to lose. He does not like to come in last. He does not like to bring up the rear. I am
Mm-hmm.
actually surprised that he's not being more active right now to try to get this done himself, because he likes to lead the way.
Yep.
It's his nature, and every year that he lets this slide is more of a chance that New York's going to be dragging up the rear, which
Yep.
I just can't understand. I just can't see him tolerating that.
It's strange.
So,
New Jersey's going to
yeah,
legalize by referendum this fall,
right,
and Governor Wolf in Pennsylvania has said he would sign a bill. And you have
yeah,
some PA's legislature. I mean, I think PA is going to take a while, but PA's medical market is booming right now.
right.
And so then you have New Jersey right there, and it doesn't make sense. So do you think that if the governor accepted the tax rates, I think the big thing too is this cannabis control board, right? The state cannabis advisory board. If these kind of things are able to be negotiated, but he said, listen, I want a certain percent into the general fund. Do you think that Senate Democrats and those in the assembly would be willing to compromise on that, on the allocations?
Yeah, I think there's flexibility
Hmm.
on where the money goes to at this point. I think there's going to be a demand for a certain percentage to go to the areas that have been systematically disenfranchised and affected by the drug war, and totally understandably and rightly so. And I
Yep.
really don't know of anybody who's not in favor of that. I mean, it's hard to find someone who thinks that that's a bad idea. Where the rest of the money goes is definitely um, something to be discussed. I know the governor at one point was talking about putting a lot of it into the subway system.
Hmm.
Well, I kind of would
Hmm.
prefer, obviously, to see it remain in the regions where it was generated,
Yeah.
to go back, especially, given the economic realities of some of the counties and cities in upstate New York. So I think that, it depend. I guess it really would depend on how much of it was earmarked in the general fund for specific things versus how much of it was really just going back into the general fund.
Yeah.
I think that as long as a certain percentage went to the affected communities, and that number, I think half is a number that gets kind of thrown out quite a bit, and I don't think that's a bad idea at all. But if you have the other half go into the general fund, unrestricted to be used for whatever, I do think that the legislature would probably go along with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's one idea. Give some of it to the REDCs. Allow them to provide grants, Main Street
That's a
grants,
great idea.
revitalization.
That's a
You
great
know,
idea.
you keep
Yep.
it in there, and I think that's going to be really important that they keep it up. The government's done a good job with that, and we've seen it
Hmm.
here in Binghamton, and we've seen it across the state. So thanks a lot, Hal. I got one last question for you. So mayors in general, I've been seen as boring, slick, just generally unappetizing, right? So but you're the cool mayor. So I have a theory here that this might have something to do with you taking Head and Heel CBD. Could you confirm or deny that, or?
The Head and Heel is a top-notch CBD product. I won't deny. I take it every night before I go to sleep, and my mom takes it. And I'll say this: I'm not making any medical claims. My mom has had such amazing results with it, and different medical problems that she's had, that she swears by it. So, yeah, I think that I'm wearing a shirt with Bigfoot on it. So maybe that's why.
Yeah, right. Well, it'd be great to maybe have you come be the mayor of Binghamton. That'd be excellent. But we'll see.
I grew up down there, so you never know.
Yep,
But
yep. You never know. Well, thanks a lot, Hal. I thought it was a great conversation. Looking forward to having you on, and great work you're doing in the Senate, and keep it up. We all really appreciate it.
thanks very much, and thanks for having me.